Part 3 is about when to do what in entrepreneurial education. A common problem in entrepreneurial education is the diversity in approaches. There is a myriad different approaches, and this confuses teachers a lot. And recommendation of what is the best approach, they differ also a lot. Many people say that it's due to an unclarity in definition. What is entrepreneurial education anyway? But I would rather say that the root cause to a lot of this confusion is that timing has not been considered. And when we talk about timing in education, we often use the word progression. When is it appropriate to do what? In primary education, in secondary education, in further education, in university education, and so on. And I would rather say that there is no single best approach. It depends on timing, and it also depends on the student's previous experience. There is not much research about progression in entrepreneurial education, but there are a few rare voices that try to give some recommendations about when to do what. Alan Gibb states that in primary education, it should be child-centered. In secondary education, it should be subject-centered. In further education, it should be vocationally centered. And at university, it should be discipline-centered. And he also has a model of what is appropriate in which level, different kinds of models and ways of working. Another rare voice in the domain of progression in entrepreneurial education is Per Blenker and his research group in Denmark. They talk about educational building blocks that can be used to create progression in the entrepreneurship curriculum by building on the broad notion of entrepreneurship as everyday practice. So entrepreneurship as everyday practice or everyday value creation practice is the foundation for many different other kinds of activities that could be part of entrepreneurship curriculum, such as creating new ventures, creating growth, facilitating social change, and other aspects that could be included. Another of the rare voices when it comes to progression is the Danish Foundation for Entrepreneurship. And they say that they have described a progression model which contains 4 basic components: action, creativity, environment, and attitudes, which is gradually changing according to the increasing experience of the students. In my research, I've also done a progression-ish model. I call it a classification, but it can also be used as a progression model. It starts with a consideration and a question. Let us consider an approach to entrepreneurial education. Do learners get to create artifacts, which is basically, do they get to create something that is a human creation of art or workmanship? If not, it's not an action-based entrepreneurial education. It could be lectures, guest lectures, group discussions, study visits, literature study, or standardized tests. Here, learners do not get to create something. If they do get to create something, we end up in the creation approach, which could be, dry business plan writing, interviews, meetings, calls, mapping and project work, role play, drama, pedagogy with no audience, and so on. But if we answer yes to the next question, are these artifacts considered valuable by stakeholders outside the creators and the teachers? If we answer yes to that question, we end up in the value creation classification, which is when you are doing business model generation, you are pitching, selling, you're co-creating with external partners, customer development, and so on. Drama pedagogy comes back here, but with an audience this time. So if we don't have an audience, it's creation. If we have an audience, because then something valuable is delivered, obviously, otherwise you would not have an audience, then we have value creation. If the learners are also expected to organize this value creation into a venture, we end up in the venture creation classification. Business plan writing, where it's real life content, venture creation courses, and so on. If the aim is also to keep this venture going after the end of the education, then we end up in the sustainable venture creation, which is basically what I call venture creation programs in the research, and my colleagues at Chalmers School of Entrepreneurship. This is a topic of research that we are probably the only research group in the world doing research on that kind of educational approaches. So as you increase, as you go down into this model, you increase the learner engagement and motivation. But unfortunately, you also increase the teaching complexity. So you have to strike a balance between complexity and engagement here. And one of the most underused aspects of education here is the value creation approach. And I put this into something I call the altruistic paradox. We get more motivated by creating value for others today than by creating value for ourselves in a distant future. And by letting learners act on and find answers to this question, for whom is this knowledge valuable in 15 minutes? It's much more motivating to say, you will have use for this knowledge in 15 years. And that is what I call learning by creating value. This will be covered more in depth in one of the other parts of this mini seminar series, value creation as pedagogy. So if we try to summarize these attempts to do a progression model, we find some things that seem to be pretty common across all of these progression models that I have shown you a little bit here. It's about creating value in teams, a team-based value creation approach. It's about connecting to outside school or university. And it's about taking action, and taking action based on knowledge and skills. Not just taking action, because if we are to learn how to apply knowledge and skills in reality, we have to base the action taking on the knowledge and skills. So this is always aspects. Then we have the first step. Could be primary education, but not necessarily. There we need to have an educating through entrepreneurship approach, where we work with embedded educational approaches, which means that entrepreneurship is not a separate subject or a separate course or a separate discussion. It is embedded in the other ordinary subjects of education. We are working with a wide definition. We let the students attempt to create value, perhaps addressing societal challenges, perhaps addressing everyday problems. We hide the theory so that we don't confuse our students in this phase. We try to make it child-centered or student-centered, and we work with storytelling as a means. This spurs creativity, uncertainty, engagement, and self-efficacy. Common desired outcomes of entrepreneurial education. Then, when we come to the second step, we find a divide or a choice. Either students self-select into a separate approach where we use a more narrow definition. We add business language, we start working with venture creation, and we have an educating about and through entrepreneurship approach. Or they continue with an embedded approach with a wide definition, where we ask the students to create value based on the curriculum knowledge. This will probably up the ante a bit, and we will see more failures, and we will see the need for more perseverance among the students. When it comes to the third step, we also add for entrepreneurship, which is basically becoming an entrepreneur. We make the theory explicit, and we can also add, because this is the last step of the education system, we add sustainable venture creation, which means to keep the venture going after the education is over, which basically generates startups. If we are working with an embedded Y definition, we also can make theory explicit here, and we can work with skill-based value creation. And this will trigger passion, entrepreneurial identity, and also growth out in the society. And we get entrepreneurs or entrepreneurial people. And the entrepreneurs are, of course, also entrepreneurial people. So we get both here. So this is an attempt to do a progression model that could perhaps solve some of the challenges in the domain of entrepreneurial education. Okay, that was part 3. In the next part, we will start looking at how to do it. What works, why does it work, and what are some tools that could be used in the entrepreneurial education domain. Thank you.